When my daughter-in-law told me she was pregnant, I already knew the truth, and my heart broke before she even spoke the words. That was the first thought that ran through my mind as I stared at her across the breakfast table, the sunlight catching the golden highlights in her hair, making it look almost ethereal. She smiled nervously, twisting the edge of her napkin between her fingers. The smell of fresh toast lingered in the air, mingling with the faint perfume she always wore, something floral, slightly sweet, and maddeningly familiar. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. I wanted to scream, to cry, to reach across and shake some sense into her. But instead, I just sat there, pretending to be calm, sipping my tea as if nothing had shifted in our carefully curated morning ritual. "Mom," she began, her voice soft but quivering, I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." Her words should have brought joy, or at least a mild flutter of anticipation. Instead, I felt my chest tighten, like a heavy stone pressing down. I had known, of course. I always knew. There had been subtle signs, the little whispers of secrets that no one else noticed, the sudden avoidance of eye contact when she thought I wasn't watching, the unspoken tension that wrapped itself around our home like a winter fog. "Congratulations," I said, my voice a touch too calm, too measured. I watched her shoulders relax slightly, the corners of her mouth curling into a hopeful smile. She didn't know that the joy she anticipated would never fully reach me, not while the shadow of betrayal hung between us. Life had been deceptively ordinary before that morning. I would wake up at 6, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen, my son already downstairs making toast while humming an old tune his father used to play. My daughter-in-law would shuffle in, sleepy-eyed, a mug of tea in her hand, hair in a messy bun, always offering me a smile that made me want to trust her, to accept her as part of the family. We'd talk about trivial things, the weather, a funny incident at the grocery store, our favorite shows. Our life seemed serene, almost too perfect in its simplicity. But beneath that surface, I had always felt a tremor, a subtle unease that I couldn't quite place. She was careful, meticulous even, in hiding it. She'd smile when my son teased her, laugh at his jokes, but I could see it in the corners of her eyes, the way her laughter didn't reach them entirely. And I had paid attention. I had watched enough to notice when she paused before answering a simple question, or when she excused herself from dinner with a flimsy reason. These little cracks told me more than any confession could. For weeks, I had been observing, weighing every word, every gesture. And then, the day I had been dreading yet anticipating arrived. She stood there in the kitchen, hands clasped in front of her stomach, voice shaking, and told me she was expecting. "Yes," I said again, forcing a smile. "That's wonderful news." Her eyes lit up with something that should have been warmth. But all I felt was the cold weight of inevitability. The child she carried wasn't my son's. I had pieced it together in quiet moments, the calls she tried to hide, the lipstick stains on shirts that didn't belong to my son, the late-night texts she thought I didn't see. And yet, until that moment, I had not allowed myself to name it, to fully confront the truth. I remember the sound of the clock ticking above us. Tick. 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 Each second stretched into an eternity. The smell of toast had become nauseating, the sunlight stabbing my eyes, and the soft hum of morning activity felt like a cruel mockery. I wanted to reach across the table, grab her hands, shake some truth out of her. But I didn't. I let her believe for a moment that this was happiness, that she had my blessing. We ate in silence, the clinking of cutlery on plates the only sound between us. My son was still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the delicate tension in the air. I envied his ignorance, the way he trusted completely, the way he loved without suspicion. If only I could protect him from what I knew, what I had suspected for weeks, maybe months. I excused myself to the sink, pretending to wash my hands but really just needing a moment to breathe. The warm water ran over my palms, and I let my forehead rest against the cool tile backsplash. I felt a tremor in my chest, a mixture of anger, fear, and sorrow. This was my family, my home, the life I had nurtured, and it was all shifting beneath my feet. I had spent years teaching my son the values of honesty, loyalty, and love. And now, I faced the uncomfortable truth that those lessons hadn't reached the person who mattered most to him right now. When I returned to the table, she was smiling, blissfully unaware of the storm inside me. "Aren't you happy for us?" she asked, tilting her head, her eyes bright with hope. I nodded, letting the calm, quiet voice I had perfected over years hold steady. "Of course I am. It's wonderful news." And yet, in my heart, I felt the rupture, the quiet breaking that comes before a flood. I would have to act, to confront, to untangle this knot of deception carefully. But not now, not in the fragile dawn of her revelation. For now, I would sit, sip my tea, and count the moments until truth demanded its place at our table. That morning, the ordinary had slipped through my fingers, replaced by a tension that wrapped around me like a second skin. The smell of coffee, the faint sunlight, the gentle hum of early morning life, all of it now seemed tainted, shadowed by the knowledge that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The days that followed were the hardest I had experienced in years. I moved through our home like a ghost, my movements precise and deliberate, masking the storm inside me. Every time I saw her, my daughter-in-law, I felt that familiar mixture of warmth and dread. She was radiant, glowing even, as if the pregnancy were a blessing she alone could bask in. But I knew better. I knew what lay beneath that glow, the hidden truths she carried in silence. At first, I tried to focus on ordinary life. I went about my mornings, making tea for my son, packing lunches, folding laundry. I watched him come and go, unaware of the delicate tension that had settled over our home. My husband, bless his heart, noticed only the quietness in my demeanor, never the tremor beneath. "You've been distant," he said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Is everything all right?" I gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Just tired, that's all." My voice was calm, practiced. I didn't want him to know the truth yet. Not until I had figured out how to face it without destroying the family completely. It wasn't easy. Every small action, every casual comment from her, set off alarms in my mind. I remember one afternoon, she laughed at something my son had said and then pulled out her phone, quickly hiding it behind her back. The look she gave me for a fleeting second, a flash of guilt, almost imperceptible, was enough. My heart sank, and I felt the old instinct awaken: observation, calculation, preparation. One evening, I found myself in the living room, pretending to read a book while listening to her quietly humming in the kitchen. I caught the faint smell of her perfume mixing with the aroma of dinner, and my chest tightened. Something about the way she moved, the way her hand lingered over her phone, made me pause. I wasn't paranoid, I had learned to recognize the subtle patterns, the lies that hid in plain sight. I remembered my own mother's advice: you can forgive what you can understand, but you must always see clearly first. I had always believed it. And now, that belief was guiding me, keeping me steady. I had to see clearly before acting. Then came the day when the first undeniable clue arrived. She had left a small piece of paper on the counter, half hidden under a cookbook. My eyes caught a phone number written in a hurried scrawl, not my son's. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at it, the room suddenly unbearably quiet. I could hear the clock ticking, slow and steady. I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that this was not my son's handwriting, not my son's number. The truth I had feared was real. I confronted myself in the mirror later that evening. My reflection looked back at me with tired eyes, lined with worry. "You have to be careful," I whispered to myself. "Don't ruin everything before you understand it." I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down. This was my family. My son's happiness, his trust, were on the line. And yet, the betrayal stung sharper than anything I had felt in years. The next morning, I watched her from the doorway as she prepared breakfast. The sunlight poured over her hair, and she moved with the kind of grace that made it almost impossible to harbor anger. I wanted to reach out, to shake her, to demand the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I asked casually, "Did you call anyone about that appointment yesterday?" She froze, glancing at me with a flicker of panic, before forcing a smile. "Oh, yes, just a routine check." Nothing important. Her voice, soft and controlled, barely betrayed her anxiety. But I had learned to read the pauses, the hesitation, the micro-expressions that gave away the secrets we tried to bury. That small pause was confirmation. The truth was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. I spent that day in quiet observation. Every text, every glance, every whispered phone call became a piece of the puzzle. The betrayal, which had begun as a vague unease, crystallized into something tangible, something real. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. My son deserved to know. And yet, I hesitated. How could I tell him without shattering everything? How could I confront her without destroying the fragile threads of family that still held us together? By evening, the weight of it became unbearable. I had to confront her, even if it meant walking into a storm I couldn't control. I found her in the living room, leafing through a magazine. The glow of the setting sun highlighted the curve of her belly, the secret life she carried that wasn't my son's. I sat beside her, careful to keep my tone gentle, Mizu. Measured. We need to talk, I said softly, and she looked up at me, startled. Her hands trembled as she set the magazine down. About what? She asked, her voice quivering just enough to reveal her fear. I took a deep breath, letting the calm, controlled exterior I had cultivated over decades settle over me. About the truth, I said. About what you're hiding. She swallowed, her lips parting slightly, as if to speak but finding no words. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us, thick and heavy. The smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen faded into the background, replaced by the acrid tang of tension, of secrets about to be revealed. Finally, she spoke. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice barely audible. It's complicated. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. I understand that life is complicated. But you've dragged my son into something he can't yet comprehend. You've made choices that affect all of us. We need honesty now. No more hiding. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she looked away, fumbling with the hem of her dress. I could feel the sincerity in her trembling hands, the guilt that weighed on her, the fear of the consequences she hadn't yet faced. I didn't speak for a moment. I let her emotions fill the space between us. Then I said, quietly, you need to tell him. You need to tell him before it's too late. Her head dropped into her hands, and I saw the raw, human fear that comes with facing the truth. The betrayal was real, but so was her vulnerability. And in that moment, I realized that while anger and sorrow were justified, the path forward required clarity, courage, and, above all, honesty. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the rhythmic ticking of the clock echoing my thoughts. My son, blissfully unaware in the next room, had no idea what waited for him tomorrow. I could almost hear his laughter from the kitchen that morning, the easy warmth of a life unshadowed by secrets. And yet, tomorrow, everything would shift. I kept replaying the conversation I'd had with her, the way her fingers trembled, the tears she could not hide, the faint smell of perfume clinging to her skin like a silent confession. I had to be careful. I had to plan this so that she wouldn't crumble completely, so that my son could understand, so that our family could survive. Morning came too soon. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in soft golden streams, painting the room in an innocent glow that mocked the heaviness in my chest. I made tea, carefully arranging our breakfast as if nothing were wrong. She joined me quietly, her eyes downcast, the weight of the secret pressing on her like a physical burden. I kept my tone neutral, gentle, guiding her with subtle nudges. It's time, I said softly, setting her teacup down. He deserves to know. Her hand shook as she picked up the cup. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, I said firmly, yet with compassion. I'll be here. You don't have to face it alone. But it has to happen. We walked upstairs together, and I saw my son emerge from the bedroom, the familiar warmth in his eyes. He smiled at us, completely unsuspecting. Morning, he said, voice cheerful. The moment I had been dreading had arrived. I guided her to sit on the sofa while I stood nearby, my hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. I took a deep breath, letting calm settle over me, giving strength to the words she needed to say. I need to tell you something, she began, her voice quivering. Something important. He nodded, leaning forward slightly, curiosity in his eyes. I could see the trust he had in her, the belief that she would never hurt him. And it broke my heart. It's about the baby, she continued, tears welling. I'm pregnant, but it's not yours. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, cutting through the morning sunlight like a knife. I watched as his expression faltered, disbelief flashing across his face, quickly replaced by hurt and confusion. What do you mean it's not mine? He asked, voice tight, trembling with emotion. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know how to tell you. I never wanted to hurt you. The room was thick with silence, the kind of silence that demands acknowledgement. I could feel my son's eyes on me, seeking support, guidance. I took a step forward, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. You have every right to be angry, I said softly. You have every right to feel hurt. But now we need honesty. No more hiding. His voice cracked as he said, I trusted you. I believed in us. And that trust is not destroyed by truth, I said firmly, looking at both of them. It's shaken, yes, but it can be rebuilt. But only if we face this together, with clarity. She lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt anyone. He sank into the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The sound of his quiet sobs filled the room, and I felt my own chest tighten, a mixture of sorrow and relief. The secret was out. The betrayal had been revealed. The path to truth, however painful, had begun. The next few days were tense. Conversations were short, full of heavy pauses, tentative glances, and the quiet hum of life attempting to continue despite the rupture. My son and his wife spoke in whispers, in corners, careful not to erupt into arguments that might fracture the fragile bonds still holding us together. I watched from a distance, providing calm, neutral presence, ready to mediate, ready to support, and ready to enforce boundaries. It was during these moments of tension that the first cracks in her composure began to show. She had been carrying the weight of deceit for months, and now, in the light of truth, the strain was visible. She would flinch when my son approached, her laughter came hesitantly, her smiles fleeting. And I, watching closely, realized that the consequences of choices cannot be hidden forever, they manifest quietly, gradually, like shadows stretching at sunset. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting our living room in deep amber, she broke down completely. I found her in the kitchen, sitting on the floor, knees drawn to her chest. Her tears flowed freely, the rawness of emotion stripped of any pretense. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. I was wrong. I knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. You can't change the past, I said softly. But you can make choices now that lead to healing. Honesty is the first step. Accountability is the second. And if you want forgiveness, it will take time. But it's possible. I remember the sound of the clock ticking above us. Tick. 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 Each second stretched into an eternity. The smell of toast had become nauseating, the sunlight stabbing my eyes, and the soft hum of morning activity felt like a cruel mockery. I wanted to reach across the table, grab her hands, shake some truth out of her. But I didn't. I let her believe for a moment that this was happiness, that she had my blessing. We ate in silence, the clinking of cutlery on plates the only sound between us. My son was still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the delicate tension in the air. I envied his ignorance, the way he trusted completely, the way he loved without suspicion. If only I could protect him from what I knew, what I had suspected for weeks, maybe months. I excused myself to the sink, pretending to wash my hands but really just needing a moment to breathe. The warm water ran over my palms, and I let my forehead rest against the cool tile backsplash. I felt a tremor in my chest, a mixture of anger, fear, and sorrow. This was my family, my home, the life I had nurtured, and it was all shifting beneath my feet. I had spent years teaching my son the values of honesty, loyalty, and love. And now, I faced the uncomfortable truth that those lessons hadn't reached the person who mattered most to him right now. When I returned to the table, she was smiling, blissfully unaware of the storm inside me. "Aren't you happy for us?" she asked, tilting her head, her eyes bright with hope. My son asked difficult questions, and she answered them honestly, no longer hiding behind excuses. It was painful to witness, yet crucial. One afternoon, I found myself alone with my daughter-in-law in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles floating lazily in the air. I sat across from her, observing her trembling hands, the haunted look in her eyes. "You're scared," I said softly. "And you should be. What you did, it was serious. But hiding from it only made it worse." She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I didn't think about the consequences until it was too late." "I know," I replied. "And that's why you need to take responsibility now. Not for me, son, but for yourself. You need to show that you can face the truth, no matter how difficult it is." Her head sank lower, and she let out a shuddering breath. "I don't know if he can forgive me." "Forgiveness isn't guaranteed," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But honesty is the first step. Without that, there's no chance at reconciliation. Without that, there's only regret." That evening, the conversation she had been avoiding finally happened. I watched from a distance as she knelt beside my son, hands trembling, eyes wet with tears. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but every word carried the weight of truth. "I have to tell you the truth," she said. "The baby, it's not yours. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, never wanted to betray your trust. But I can't keep hiding from it anymore." My son froze, his expression a mixture of shock, hurt, and disbelief. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, voice tight with emotion. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing you, afraid of losing this family, afraid of what you'd think of me." I felt my own chest tighten, remembering the countless times I had counseled both of them about honesty, about the importance of facing consequences. I could see the raw vulnerability in her, the first glimmer of true accountability. And I realized that this moment, as painful as it was, held the potential for healing, if they allowed it. Over the following days, I continued to observe, gently guiding when necessary. I watched my son wrestle with anger, disappointment, and grief, yet also the beginnings of understanding. I saw her take deliberate steps to make amends, small gestures of care, honest conversations, and open acknowledgement of her mistakes. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, the tension in the room was still palpable but tempered by the quiet efforts toward reconciliation. My son looked at his wife and said, hesitantly, "I don't know if I can forgive you yet. But I need to try. I need to understand." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded, her body relaxing slightly. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. I watched them both, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The betrayal had been revealed, the confrontation had happened, and now the slow, difficult path toward healing had begun. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and in the world of family, sometimes that was all that mattered. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm, quieter and more deliberate than before. The house no longer felt like a ticking time bomb, though the memory of that morning, the revelation, the betrayal, still lingered in the corners, like shadows that refused to leave entirely. I spent most of my time observing quietly, giving space where it was needed, and stepping in only when necessary. My son was cautious, measuring his words and actions, learning to navigate the tangled emotions of hurt and trust. My daughter-in-law, on her part, moved with a humility that had been absent before, careful not to overstep. yet determined to prove that she could be honest, accountable, and, perhaps, worthy of forgiveness. One afternoon, she came to me while I was arranging flowers in the living room. The scent of lilies filled the air, mixing with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She sat across from me, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes wide and earnest. I want to do the right thing," she said softly. "For him, for the baby, and for this family. I know I can't undo what's been done, but I want to try." I studied her carefully, sensing the sincerity in her tone, the tremor in her voice, the way her fingers flexed nervously. "Actions matter more than words," I said gently. "Every choice you make from now on will either heal or hurt. You have to be mindful, deliberate, and honest. No more shortcuts. No more hiding." She nodded, a shiver running through her frame. "I understand. And I want to do better." Over time, I saw small but meaningful changes. She stopped avoiding my son's gaze, began including him in every step of her pregnancy, and openly acknowledged the truth to extended family members who had begun to notice the tension. She even apologized directly to friends and relatives who had unknowingly been caught in the web of her deception. These gestures weren't grand or dramatic, but they carried weight because they were genuine. One Sunday afternoon, we sat together in the living room. My son held her hand loosely, and she rested her head gently against his shoulder. The air was calm, filled only with the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the distant chirping of birds outside. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't blissful. But it was a start. I watched them and felt a quiet sense of relief. The betrayal still existed, it had left marks, but the honesty and accountability they were embracing had begun to mend the fractures. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about creating space for trust to grow again, however slowly. One evening, I found myself speaking with my son alone. The moonlight poured through the window, casting silver shadows across the floor. He looked tired, contemplative, his eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and tentative hope. "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened," he said quietly. "But I want to try. I want to rebuild what we had. I don't know if she, or I, can ever fully heal." I reached over, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Healing takes time," I said. "It isn't instant. Trust, love, and understanding have to be nurtured carefully, every day. The fact that you're willing to try means more than anything. And remember, you're not alone. We're a family. We survived these things together." He gave a small nod, and I saw a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. It wasn't the closure of a storybook ending, but it was real. It was authentic. And in the world of family, that authenticity mattered more than perfection. As the months passed, I noticed subtle shifts in the household. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then more natural. Conversations were no longer full of pauses and hesitation but carried a careful, deliberate honesty. My son learned to ask questions without anger, and my daughter-in-law learned to answer them with transparency and humility. The pregnancy progressed, and the small life growing within her became a symbol of both challenge and hope. I often found myself watching them together, marveling at the resilience of human hearts. The journey from betrayal to accountability, from hurt to healing, was slow and imperfect, but it was happening. I remember one afternoon, as I baked bread in the kitchen, the warm, yeasty smell filling the air, my son walked in holding his wife's hand. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, a quiet smile on her face. He turned to me and said softly, "Thank you, for guiding us through this, for not letting it destroy everything." I smiled, feeling the tremor of emotion that comes with relief and pride. "You did the hard work yourselves," I said. "I only helped you see the truth. The rest is yours to build." It was then that I realized the full weight of the lesson this experience had brought. Life wasn't about avoiding pain or betrayal, it was about navigating it with honesty, dignity, and courage. And while scars remained, they served as reminders of the strength we all possessed to face difficult truths and emerge, if not unbroken, then resilient. The birth of the baby arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the kind of day when the air feels almost electric, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I remember standing in the hospital corridor, hands clasped together, heart hammering in my chest. My son paced beside me, a mixture of nervous energy and protective instinct radiating from him. And she, my daughter-in-law, lay on the hospital bed, pale but determined, gripping my son's hand with a strength I had not expected. When the first cries of the baby cut through the sterile air, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Relief, awe, a strange mixture of joy and sorrow all rolled into one. The little life that had caused so much tension, so much fear, now existed outside the shadow of secrets. And for a moment, everything else, the betrayal, the lies, the tears, fell away, leaving only the fragility and beauty of new life. My son leaned down, brushing a gentle kiss across his wife's forehead. "She's beautiful," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "She is," I agreed softly, kneeling beside them, feeling the warmth of family hold us together. For the first time in months, the air felt light, even if only slightly. I looked at my daughter-in-law, her eyes glistening with tears, a mix of exhaustion and wonder. "You did well," I said. "All of this is the beginning of something new. You faced the truth, and now you can step forward honestly, with courage." She nodded, swallowing hard, her lips trembling. "Thank you, for not giving up on me, on us." And in that moment, I realized something important. Forgiveness was not an act of weakness, it was a deliberate choice, an acknowledgement that people, despite their mistakes, could strive to do better. I had been angry, heartbroken, and betrayed, yes, but I had also seen the sincerity in her actions, the desire to make amends. That mattered more than anything else. The weeks after the birth were filled with careful adjustments. My son held the baby for hours, gazing down at her with a mix of awe and cautious tenderness. My daughter-in-law navigated motherhood with an honesty and humility that surprised even me. She no longer hid behind smiles or avoidance, every question she answered honestly, every concern she addressed with thoughtfulness. Family dinners became quieter, slower, more deliberate. We shared meals not just out of habit, but as a ritual of reconciliation and understanding. I watched as my son and his wife grew into a cautious but promising rhythm, learning to trust each other again, step by step. One evening, I found myself rocking the baby gently in my arms. The scent of her soft hair, the warmth of her tiny body, filled me with an unexpected tenderness. My son and daughter-in-law stood nearby, hands intertwined, watching us with tentative smiles. I realized that this child, born of secrets, mistakes, and fear, was also a symbol of second chances. I turned to my daughter-in-law, meeting her eyes. "Life isn't perfect," I said quietly. "Mistakes happen. But it's what we do after those mistakes that defines us. You've chosen honesty, courage, and accountability. That is what matters now." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled softly. "I'll remember that. Always." My son, standing beside her, nodded. "We'll remember, too. Together." Months passed, and slowly, the house regained a sense of normalcy. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then more freely. I watched my son and his wife navigate parenthood, their interactions now tinged with care, understanding, and cautious trust. I could see the effort they both put into rebuilding their relationship, each step deliberate, each gesture meaningful. One morning, I stood at the doorway of the nursery, watching my son cradle the baby, softly humming an old lullaby I had sung to him when he was a child. My daughter-in-law sat nearby, gently stroking his arm, her eyes filled with quiet pride and gratitude. It was a small, intimate moment, but it felt monumental. Life had shifted, yes, but in ways that allowed growth, forgiveness, and connection to take root. I realized then that family, though fragile, was also resilient. Trust could be rebuilt, even after betrayal. Love could endure, even after fear. And the scars we carried, though painful, were also reminders of our capacity for patience, understanding, and compassion. One evening, as the house settled into quiet, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had endured. From the first moment of suspicion, through confrontation, heartbreak, and accountability, to the eventual birth and tentative reconciliation, the path had been anything but easy. And yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, I saw the beauty in resilience. I thought about my son, standing tall even amidst hurt, willing to face the truth rather than turn away. I thought about my daughter-in-law, learning the value of honesty, humility, and deliberate choice. And I thought about myself, learning that sometimes guiding through pain requires patience, compassion, and the courage to act with integrity. It wasn't a perfect ending. It never could be. But it was real, authentic, and deeply human, a story of mistakes, consequences, and the slow, careful rebuilding of trust. And as I stood by the window, watching the last rays of sunlight fade, I realized that life's most important lessons often come through hardship, through betrayal, and through the courage to confront the truth. The past could not be undone, but the future, our choices, our actions, our honesty, was ours to shape. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize that life often throws us into situations we never expected. We think we know the people closest to us, the ones we trust the most, but sometimes, secrets linger beneath the surface. And when those secrets come to light, they shake us to our very core. I've learned that betrayal, while painful, does not have to define us. It is a test of character, patience, and resilience. My son and his wife made mistakes, serious mistakes, but they also had the courage to face the truth, to be honest, and to take responsibility. That is what allowed us to begin the slow, difficult work of healing.